Blessings, beloved, and welcome to another episode of the Ascension Café. I'm so glad you are here. I hope you've made yourself a cuppa, you're nice and relaxed. This week's profound message is all about releasing fear. And it doesn't matter where you're at on your spiritual path, each and every one of us has those times where we're almost frozen in fear. And I think for me, the last year has been quite a roller coaster ride of really having to navigate my fears, not in a way that is anything radical, but just literally sitting with those emotions, really feeling and sensing where is that fear coming from and why am I even feeling it? Not in judgment, just to bring in that self-awareness. This journey that we often talk about in spiritual circles of, moving from fear to love, it has a very powerful and purposeful meaning for each and every one of us. On our spiritual path and even in our daily lives, fear can keep us stuck. It can stop us from making decisions and choices that we need to for our highest and greatest good, or from moving on, from things that perhaps are finished and done for us. That fear can stop us realizing a truly meaningful life of happiness, joy, and contentment. We can get stuck in the same old, what we call our comfort zone. It is also really important that we have to remember that fear is just energy. And yes, we can't destroy energy, but we can transmute it. We can alter the state of fear. Psychology tells us that there are many different forms of fear. Fear comes from different places. It can be instinctual. It can be from social learning and patterning. It can be existential. It can be phobic, something that is created from an experience that then kind of manifests into something much bigger. And it can also be cultural, things we are taught, we are conditioned to believe, that come from the society that we have been born into, the family that we've born into. Overcoming fear is a journey. Yes, there are quite radical things out there that we can engage in. And for that moment, they give us this wonderful kind of sense of euphoria that we have overcome a fear, but they are momentary, fleeting experiences. They help, but really, truly, to overcome fear, it is about mastering the mind. Before we delve into that, I want to talk a little bit more about where our fears are formed. Not so much from a psychological perspective, but from a spiritual perspective, from the lived experience of being human. The first one I want to talk about is childhood fears. So I want to share a couple of examples of this. Childhood fears can come from things we are taught as a child and from our own experiences. If you think about a lot of childhood tales, things like fables, myths, folklore, books that we read or read to us as children. Things like Hansel and Gretel, Three Little Pigs, Red Riding Hood. Each of these stories really ingrains fear in a child. They are stories of something bad chasing the character, hunting them down to do them harm. And when we read these stories to children, do we really consider what damage they may be creating or doing? These stories we've passed down generation after generation, as have things like nursery rhymes. They're all loaded with fear, controlling, programming. But of course, as well as learning to become feared of something as a child, we can have experiences too. Two examples of this. One comes from my own experience and the other from my daughter's. When I was a child, I loved all of nature. I was fascinated by the animal kingdom, by the birds, the bees, etc., etc. But I learned to become feared of spiders. This didn't come from my mother. My mother actually was always very brave around us, and I could tell. I could tell sometimes when she was being brave, but mum wasn't really that frightened of things like spiders. My fear of spiders come from situations and circumstances where I actually should have felt very safe, but I was made to feel vulnerable. Vulnerable to the point where at moments when I should have felt safe, I questioned my safety. And little silly examples of this, and one I want to share with you actually isn't related to spiders, but my fear of spiders seems to extend to big moths for some reason. Well, I know the reason. I'm going to share that with you now. One year we were on holiday, and growing up, we had a caravan. I loved our caravan holidays. We were out in nature. I was absolutely in my element. I loved it. I spent many days mooching around, exploring woods, meadows, looking at flora and fauna, watching the insects live, abundant. And I just loved it. I was in my absolute essence. It was wonderful. One evening, we'd had an amazing night, and mum and dad had actually spent some time um, outside the caravan with their friends, continuing celebrating a wonderful time together in a beautiful setting. What I remember a balmy summer's evening. My sister and I had been put to bed in the caravan, and we'd probably been up to mischief and pretended to be asleep when we weren't asleep. But eventually, my parents joined us, and as they stepped into the caravan, a huge, massive moth was drawn to the light. The caravan flew in with them. It fluttered and bounced about our tiny caravan. Me and my sister Kathy were squealing and giggling. And Dad said that he had actually got the moth. And I knew he hadn't. I knew it was hiding somewhere. I knew he was fibbing. I was told to get straight back into bed and to get to sleep. And as I climbed in my sleeping bag, I felt something against my leg, something banging against my leg, a fluttering on my leg. And I shot out of my sleeping bag. My dad said there was nothing to fear. What was I doing? I said that the moth was in my sleeping bag. He said it wasn't, it was in my mind. and to get straight back into bed. And he shouted at me, and I dove into bed because I was feared of Dad at that point. Dad came over. He's unzipped my sleeping bag, went down to the bottom where I said the moth had been, moved his hand around and said, "See, there is nothing there." He zipped my sleeping bag back up and told me to get straight to sleep and turned the lights off. And as a child, I was actually frightened of the dark. So three things were going on for me here now. I was afraid of Dad because he'd become angry. I was afraid of the dark in the caravan. And I was afraid that the moth was still in my sleeping bag. Literally within seconds, I felt the flutter on my legs again. Fear rose even stronger from deep within my belly. I screamed. Dad shouted. He literally pulled me out of my sleeping bag, switched the light back on, unzipped it, and the huge moth flew out. He caught it and he threw it out of the caravan door. He turned to me and just simply said, "Get back to sleep." That moment stayed with me, not because I didn't receive an apology from Dad, but because he'd lied to me. He shouted at me when I was feeling afraid, and I felt alone. Another story I want to share with you is quite classic of how we learn from our parents and we mirror their behaviors, and we say the things that our parents said to us, those phrases. One day, my eldest daughter, who would have been about 8 at the time, she was going through a phase of really testing her boundaries with myself and her father, my ex-husband. And this particular day, for some reason, maybe I was just tired or stressed, but I was irked more than usual with her testing my boundaries. And after several times of asking her not to do something because I was afraid she was going to hurt herself, she continued to do it. And in a moment of complete frustration, I blurted out to her, "If you don't stop doing that now, there's going to be trouble with a capital T." That may seem completely innocent. And it's just that exaggeration of T, trouble, big trouble. That night, I woke, I don't know, maybe 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I could hear my eldest daughter crying. I shot out of bed, ran into her bedroom. And I said, "Heather, what on earth is up, sweetheart?" She said, "I've had an awful nightmare, Mummy." And I said, "What was it about?" And she told me, and it's quite laughable now, but she told me that she'd had this nightmare about this huge monster that was the shape of a capital T. And it was hairy, and it was growling and snarling and snapping at her, trying to bite her, chasing her. And I felt awful because I hadn't even thought about those words I'd said to her. And my daughter, who is really a very high sensitive, had took my words literally and had this nightmare about this monster, this manifestation of this capital T, her being in big, big trouble. After holding her close and telling her so much how much I loved her and I'm sorry that I frightened her, I didn't mean it in the way she had understood it to be, and that she was safe and I loved her. Eventually, we had a really good laugh about it. And still to this day, we have a laugh about it. But psychologically, in that moment, without meaning to, I had created this really deep fear, this psychological deep fear within her, as my father had done with me. It was an ancestral, it was a karmic, it was a lineage wound that now needed to be healed. Of course, fear doesn't just come from childhood, it comes from conditioning and programming. We have institutional fear, that can be religion. It can be things like governmental. Think back to the debacle of the COVID lockdown. Now, I'm not in any way, sense, or form saying that COVID wasn't real. It was real. People suffered greatly. My parents, my mother-in-law suffered greatly during that time, as did my daughter, who had a miscarriage during that time and then eventually had her first child during a lockdown. It was an awful time. I knew friends who lost loved ones. It was horrific. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is how it all unfolded. The control, the fear-based control that rippled through media, through the news, through the way that we were told we couldn't do this, we couldn't do that. And then the unfolding of the farce that was the vaccines. And that in itself is a series of conversations that we can have in our spiritual circles. But that is just one example of how institutionally fear is created. And that things like media and social media are used to instill that fear in each and every one of us. Of course, religion also has a role to play in this. For eons of time, centuries, religion has used fear-based control to manipulate people. This is played out in many different ways. You know, some of us have built up fear lifetime after lifetime. We may carry what we call the witch wound. It's very real for those of us light workers that are out there doing our spiritual work, you know, through being space holders, facilitators, mediums, teachers, whatever role we play. The witch wound is very real. We have a fear of being seen and being heard because previously, when we spoke our truth, the truth of the eternal living light of God's source, we were persecuted, hunted down, and even killed. Our soul remembers that experience, and we hold that fear within our light body, within our field. We can clear and heal the witch wound, of course we can. But there is something even far deeper than that. It is the sense of separation. When we are born, we go through a process of amnesia. We forget that we are divinely connected to the eternal living light, beloved God's source, that we are a spark, an essence, and that we are all connected divinely and instinctively connected together. We are never separate. But the program that runs through each and every one of us, and that is absolutely creating the fear that we experience day in, day out in our lived human experience, is the God wound. And it is that separation. It is the fear of being alone, the fear of being separated. And that is exactly what it is, beloved. It is a fear. It is energy that can be transmuted and healed. It isn't real. What is real, beloved, is oneness and unity, and that you are a divine being of light having a human experience right now, and that love is your very essence. And the best way that we can overcome all fears, whether they're phobias that we've developed through lived experience, whether the fears that we have been taught or learnt through our childhood, or that we've been conditioned to believe through religion or through governmental institutions and fear programming, lifetime after lifetime. Ultimately, we overcome all of that through remembering that we are powerful, not powerless, and that fear is a mere energy, and that we don't need to feel we have to be fearless. We have to let go of that. We are powerful spiritual warriors. Yes, we are. But we are, it's not that we're fearless. It's just that we face our fears through that belief and trust that we are divine beings of light and that everything is transient, everything passes. And when we remember that we are not disconnected or separated from God, that God resides within us, the kingdom of heaven is within us, and that we are in that second coming of Christ through our hearts and our souls, a deep remembrance that Christ resides within us, then we overcome fear because it is but an illusion. And our reality is love. I hope this, beloveds, helps each and every one of you to overcome your fears. It is a journey, but by remembering your true soul essence and that you are a divine being of light, then you can overcome all of your fears. You can move from the ego-based energy of fear deeper into love every day, more and more. May you go through this week with love and compassion and clarity. Much love and blessings from me, Carrie Knott, in the Ascension Café. And I hope to see you very, very soon, beloved.